The doors of the admission chamber exploded open at 0600 sharp, and Nora walked in carrying a bag that was on fire. Not dramatically on fire, not catastrophically on fire. Just a small, steady, cheerful flame eating through the bottom left corner of her canvas bag, and she appeared to have made a conscious decision not to address it. Dean Vos Krathen, the 8-foot reptilian administrator whose slate-gray scales caught the harsh plasma torchlight like wet stone, looked up from behind his massive curved desk. His two thick arms froze mid-paperwork. His vertical yellow slit eyes tracked from the small flame to the girl's face, back to the flame, and his forked tongue flicked out twice in rapid succession.
"Your carrying vessel,"
he said carefully,
"is combusting."
Nora looked down at the bag. She considered the fire for exactly 3 seconds with her sharp brown eyes, head tilting slightly to one side. Then she set the bag on the floor, stepped on the burning corner once with her boot, and the flame died with a small, resigned hiss. She straightened up, adjusted her battered gray jacket, and looked back at the dean as if nothing had happened, because, as far as she was concerned, nothing had. "Fixed," she said. "I'm here for enrollment." All of Krathen's clawed hands froze again. His forked tongue flicked slowly, tasting the specific flavor of whatever was currently happening to his morning. The pale gold walls of the admission chamber, etched with the insignia of every species in the Galactic Accord across every panel, seemed to hold their breath. The amber seal light above the 12-foot black alloy doors pulsed once, soft and uncertain. "Species designation," Krathen said, picking up his intake stylus. Nora reached into the scorched bag and produced a crumpled document. She slid it across the massive curved desk. Krathen picked it up, read it, set it down, read it again, then held it up to the harsh overhead plasma light as if expecting the document to change its mind under scrutiny. "This says," he said slowly, "unclassified terrestrial organism." That's correct. That is not a species designation recognized by the Galactic Accord's enrollment registry. "I know." Nora pulled out a second document. "That's why I also brought this one." Krathen read the second document. His jutting brow ridge, thick as a shelf of gray stone, lowered approximately 2 inches. He read it a second time. He set both documents flat on the desk and pressed both arms against the surface in the Zelthari gesture that translated roughly as, "I am choosing not to react to this, and I want that choice acknowledged." The document was a letter of provisional enrollment, signed in Chancellor Eladra's amber seal format, permitting entry for one Nora, species pending verification, under Accord Bylaw 7.14c, which governed enrollment for organisms whose classification was under active investigation by the Xenobiological Registry. It was entirely legitimate. It was also the first time Bylaw 7.14cc had ever been used by something that walked through a front door carrying its own fire. Krathen's tongue flicked once more. He stamped the document with more force than was technically required.
"Welcome,"
he said, in the tone of a reptile who already knew he would regret this, "to the Academy." The grand corridor stretched long and vaulted ahead of Nora at 0615. Dark polished stone floors reflecting the emergency blue lighting strips overhead. Industrial pipes ran along the high ceiling. Student lockers lined both walls in long, identical rows, each labeled in a different species script. Angular Zelthari, looping Felrin curves, blocky Granuk symbols. Her bootsteps echoed. The corridor was empty, except for her. Then Saya appeared from around a corner and stopped dead. Saya was a Felrin student, 6 feet of lean feline grace, short silver-white fur, with dark geometric markings running along her jaw and both arms, 2 large amber vertical slit eyes that currently had the expression of someone who had walked into a room and found furniture rearranged without explanation. Her long articulated tail, which she clearly could not fully control, rose to a rigid horizontal position. Her 2 lean arms were crossed over her chest, 4 fingered hands with retractable claws tucked politely out of sight. She looked at Nora. Her tail twitched once.
"You're the unclassified terrestrial organism,"
she said. It was not a question. It was the tone of someone confirming an unpleasant fact before deciding what to do with it. "Word travels fast," Nora said. "The dean filed your intake form 14 minutes ago." Saya's amber eyes moved from Nora's face to the scorched bag to Nora's face again. Her tail flicked left. "I'm Saya, 3rd year, top academic rank." She paused 1 beat. "You've been placed in advanced interspecies strategy." "Is that impressive?" Saya's tail went fully vertical. "That course has a 91 applicant waitlist. No first year has ever been placed directly into it." Her silver-white fur along her arms shifted slightly, the geometric markings catching the blue corridor light. "I want to be clear that I find this irregular." "Noted," Nora said. She started walking again. Saya fell into step beside her, which appeared to surprise Saya more than it surprised Nora. Her tail remained at a stiff, suspicious horizontal as they moved down the long, polished corridor toward the commons, the blue overhead lights sliding across the stone floor around their feet. "What are you?" Saya asked, after 8 seconds of walking. "Complicated," Nora said. "That's not a species." "The registry is still arguing about the category." Saya's tail twitched hard left. "The Xenobiological Registry has classified 4,214 species across the known galaxy. They argued about 1, the Peluvian deep swimmers, for 6 standard months before reaching consensus." "How long did that take?" Nora asked. 6 months, Saya said. "As I just said." "Right." Nora glanced at her sideways. "My file has been open for 2 years." Saya stopped walking. Nora kept going. After a 3-second delay, Saya's bootsteps resumed behind her, slightly faster than before. The Academy Commons was enormous, loud, and filled with the layered scents of 37 species morning meals, most of which had no business occupying the same airspace. The great domed transparent ceiling showed stars burning cold and brilliant overhead, and the curved communal tables glowed amber from their embedded lights. And students of remarkable variety sat and moved and argued under that alien sky. The central display board cycled through class schedules in 42 languages. Nora watched it scroll, found her name in the 3rd rotation, and noted she had been placed in 4 courses, including Advanced Interspecies Strategy, Xenological Ethics, Applied Resource Theory, and one labeled simply with a symbol she couldn't read that Saya, materializing at her shoulder, translated as Threat Assessment and Response. "That one," Saya said, her amber eyes fixed on the board, her tail coiled tight, "is typically reserved for 4th-year students." Said Nora. Torvek arrived at their table approximately 90 seconds later, lowering himself onto the seat across from Nora, with the deliberate care of someone whose body weight could damage furniture if he wasn't thoughtful about it. Torvek was a Granuk student, 6.5 feet of broad, slow-moving solidity, rough ash-gray skin with visible mineral veins running pale along both forearms, 2 deep-set dark green eyes under a brow ridge like a stone ledge, 2 broad arms resting flat on the table with a soft thud. He looked at Nora for a long moment. He looked at the scorched bag sitting on the table between them. He looked back at Nora. "Your bag is damaged," he said. His voice was low, the way a mountain would sound if it spoke. "Fire," Nora said. Torvek nodded slowly, processing this. "From outside," he said, "or from inside the bag?" Nora opened her mouth, closed it, and tilted her head. "That's actually a better question than most people ask." Torvek's dark green eyes remained steady. His mineral-veined arms didn't move. "I'm Torvek, second year. I study applied geology and structural failure analysis." "Nora, first year, apparently. Unclassified terrestrial organism." Torvek nodded again, with exactly the same energy he'd used to nod about the bag. He reached across the table, picked up her crumpled enrollment document, read it, set it back down.
You're in threat assessment and response,
He said.
So I'm told.
"I'm in threat assessment and response," he said. He looked at her for another moment. "I've been trying to get a study partner for 3 months. Everyone finds it too intense." Saya, who had sat down at the far end of the table and was very pointedly arranging her own study materials, made a quiet sound that was technically not a word, but communicated deep skepticism regardless. Nora looked at Torvek. "What time does it start?" "Oh, 900. "I'll be there," she said. Saya's tail, which had been slowly lowering toward a neutral position, snapped back upright. The trouble started at 0843, which was 16 minutes before threat assessment and response even began. So really it was impressively efficient trouble. It started in the grand corridor, outside the row of student lockers, when Draz appeared. Draz was the Academy's Velkar security officer. Broad, blunt-faced, dark violet rough-textured skin, 2 heavy flat-handed arms hanging at his sides, 2 deep amber eyes set wide on his angular face, above twin short horns. He was 6'9" and had the energy of a wall that had developed opinions. He was standing in front of Nora's assigned locker, with a datapad in one hand, and an expression that suggested he had been standing there for some time, and planned to continue indefinitely. "Nora," he said. Not a greeting, a confirmation. "Yes," she said. "Your locker assignment has been flagged." He held up the datapad. The screen showed her name, her locker number, and a red notification bar across the top that read, "Species verification pending. Restricted access zones apply." Until the Xenobiological Registry closes your classification file, you are restricted from the following Academy areas. He read from the datapad: the Specimen Archive, the Xenotech Workshop, the Upper Observatory, the Diplomatic Suite Corridor. He lowered the datapad. "Do you understand?" "I understand that's a lot of places I apparently can't go," Nora said. "Correct. Can I ask why the Specimen Archive is on that list?" Draz's wide amber eyes didn't blink. "You might be a specimen." Nora stared at him. Draz stared back. "Right," she said. "Do not enter restricted zones," he said, and walked away down the blue-lit corridor, his flat, heavy footsteps disappearing toward the main wing. Nora watched him go, then turned to her locker, opened it, and began loading her scorched bag with the few items the Academy had placed inside for new students. She was halfway through this process when she noticed the small rectangular package sitting at the very back of the locker, wrapped in unmarked gray material with no label, no species identifier, and no explanation. She held it up. It was roughly the size and weight of a hardcover book. She turned it over. Nothing. She put it in her bag. Down the corridor, out of sight, the amber seal light above the admission chamber doors pulsed once, very quietly, in the dark. Testing Hall 7 was cold and smelled like ozone, and exactly 0 students had ever voluntarily enjoyed being in it. The 12 transparent testing pods stood in 2 rows under flat blue overhead lights, each one a sealed cube with a chair and a task terminal and a small equipment tray. Nora sat in Pod 6 at 1100, 2 hours after a threat assessment class in which she had correctly identified 6 threat scenarios in a row using logic that the Granok professor described as unconventional to the point of concern, and stared at the first task on the terminal screen. The screen showed a simple instruction in Accord standard text. Construct a working communication signal using only the materials on the tray. The tray held 4 items: a length of copper wire, a small glass disc, a compressed gas cartridge the size of her thumb, and a dried plant stem of unknown origin. Nora looked at the 4 items. She picked up the copper wire and the glass disc. In Pod 9, Saya, who had been placed in the same assessment by what the scheduling system described as coincidence and what Saya's tail described as an outrage, was already assembling something precise and deliberate on her own tray. Silver-white fur catching the cold blue light. Amber eyes focused to a point. In Pod 3, Torvek was holding the compressed gas cartridge and studying it with the patient attention of someone who had all the time in geological history. Nora bent the copper wire into a coil. She pressed it against the glass disc. She picked up the compressed gas cartridge, looked at the valve, and released a controlled half-second burst of gas across the coil, while simultaneously holding the glass disc at a specific angle to the overhead lights. The glass disc acted as a crude focusing lens. The gas ionized briefly. For approximately 3 seconds, the pod filled with a soft, crackling hum, and the terminal pinged. Signal detected. Range: 14 meters. 14 meters was not impressive by galactic communication standards. Saya's terminal pinged at that moment. Signal detected. Range: 340 meters. Nora looked at her result. She looked at the dried plant stem she hadn't used. She picked it up, snapped it in half, pressed the broken end against the copper coil while repeating the gas burst, and her terminal pinged a second time. Signal detected. Range: 2,891 meters. The sudden ping was loud enough that Saya's amber eyes snapped sideways toward Pod 6. Her tail went horizontal. Her own terminal read 340 meters in large green text, and she looked at it. And she looked at Pod 6, and her retractable claws extended approximately 2 millimeters from her fingertips without her appearing to notice. The Granok assessment proctor, standing at the front of the room with a tablet, looked at his tablet, looked at Pod 6, looked at his tablet again, and wrote something down that took considerably longer than any of the other notes he had taken that morning. Up on the Chancellor's observation deck, high above the Academy Commons, where the stars showed cold through the transparent dome, Chancellor Eladra stood at the long glass railing with her pale lavender hands resting lightly on the surface, her 2 large silver reflective eyes aimed downward at the general direction of Testing Hall 7. The pale green circular terminal beside her was open to the assessment feed. She watched the number, 2,891 meters, sit there on the screen, and she was very still in the way that crystalline things are still. And the light caught her elongated 4-fingered hands and made long, pale shadows across the glass floor. Behind her, the door to the observation deck opened, and Dean Crathen stepped through, all 8 feet of gray-scaled frame ducking slightly under the doorframe, his 2 clawed arms carrying a secondary data pad. He came to stand beside her. He looked at the terminal screen. "She used the plant stem," he said. "Yes," Eladra said. Her voice was the kind of quiet that fills a room. The plant stem was not part of the assessed materials. Crathen's forked tongue flicked. It was packing material from the locker supply kit. She brought it in herself, apparently without recognizing it as anything significant. She recognized it as carbon fiber bonding compound in dried form, Eladra said. "Which is what it is. The Valithian Supply Company uses it as packing because it's inert in standard atmospheric conditions. She paused. Not in ionized gas. Crathen looked at her. She figured that out, Elidra said, in approximately 40 seconds. His forked tongue flicked twice. The registry file, he said. How much longer before they reach classification consensus? They have been arguing, Elidra said, for 2 years. The primary disagreement is between the Threat Assessment Division, which wants to classify the species as a Category 4 strategic intelligence,
And the Cultural Studies Division, which wants to classify them as a Category 2 curious generalist.
She turned her silver eyes toward him. The Secondary Xenobiological Committee sent a note last month suggesting the disagreement itself might be diagnostic. Crathen was quiet for a moment. Below, through the dome, the Commons went about its morning business in amber light and noise. What does that mean? He said. It means, Elidra said, looking back at the terminal where 2,891 meters sat quietly on the screen, that they think the fact that it's difficult to categorize her is the answer. She folded her long lavender fingers together, which makes her either the most interesting enrollment in Academy history or a significant institutional problem. She paused. Possibly both. The thing in the gray-wrapped package, which Nora had been ignoring since morning, turned out to be a book. She opened it at 1400 in the Commons, sitting at the amber-lit curved table with a tray of Academy-issued food that she was eating without complaint, despite the fact that it tasted like someone had described food to a machine that had never encountered food. The book was old, not old in the way of digital archives, but physically old, the kind of old that lived in page texture and faint smell and the slight give of a cover that had been opened many times. It was written in a chord standard on one side of each page and in a language she didn't recognize on the other side. She was reading it when Saya sat down across from her. Saya sat down without announcing herself or asking permission, which suggested either familiarity or the specific type of competitive irritation that expressed itself through proximity. Her silver-white fur was immaculate. Her amber eyes went immediately to the book. Her tail curled once, slowly. "Where did that come from?" she said. "My locker," Nora said. "That script on the other side," Saya said, leaning forward slightly, the dark geometric markings along her jaw sharpening in the amber table light. "That's old Selene, pre-Accord. That writing system hasn't been in active use for 800 standard years." Nora turned the book to look at the unfamiliar script side. Then she turned it back. "What does it say?" Saya looked at the page for a long moment, her amber vertical slit eyes moving slowly across the lines. Her tail went very still in the particular way it went still when she was thinking hard and didn't want anyone to notice. "It says," she said finally, "the ones who cannot be named have been named before. Look in the archive of First Contact." She looked up from the book. That's all. That whole page. Just that. Nora closed the book. She looked at Saya. "Where's the archive of First Contact?" Saya's claws extended 1 millimeter. "It's in the specimen archive," she said, "which is one of your restricted zones." They looked at each other across the amber-lit table. "I'm not suggesting anything," Saya said immediately. Her tail suggested everything. "Neither am I," Nora said. Torvek appeared behind Saya's shoulder, lowering himself onto the bench with a soft structural thud, a tray of food in his broad gray hands. He looked at the book. He looked at Nora. He looked at Saya's tail. "We're going to the specimen archive," he said. It was not a question. "No," Saya said. "Yes," Nora said. Saya's tail went horizontal. She picked up her own food tray, set it down again, and stared at the ceiling dome where the stars showed cold and distant and completely indifferent to Academy restricted zone policy. Then she looked back at Nora. "If Draz catches us," she said, "I am going to point at you and say I was attempting a citizen's apprehension." "Fair," Nora said. They went at 15:30, when Draz's patrol rotation took him to the East Wing, and the specimen archive corridor sat empty and blue-lit and very quiet. Saya moved first, lean and silent, silver-white fur barely catching the emergency lighting. And Nora moved second in her gray jacket. And Torvek moved third, with the quiet, rumbling care of a geological feature trying very hard not to be heard. They reached the archive door. It was sealed with a standard Accord biometric lock, pale green light on the panel, the word "restricted" glowing in 6 languages above the frame. Nora looked at the lock. She reached into her scorched bag and took out the copper wire from the morning's assessment. She bent the end into a specific curve, pressed it into the panel's secondary input slot, the maintenance access port that every Academy facility had and that the student orientation materials did not mention, and held it there. The lock pinged. The light turned amber. "Wait! What?" Saya whispered sharply, her tail spiking vertical, her claws fully extended. "How did you know that was there?" "Same design as the locker panels," Nora said. The light turned green. The door opened. Saya stared at the open door. She looked at Torvek. Torvek's dark green eyes were steady. "I also noticed the maintenance port," he said. "I didn't have wire." The specimen archive was vast and dark and cold and smelled like preservation chemicals and dust. Rows of sealed cases stretched back into the darkness, each one lit from within by a dim amber preservation glow, each one containing something floating or crystallized or suspended in gel. Biological samples, artifact fragments, catalogued materials from 800 years of Accord exploration. Nora walked the rows with the light from her datapad, cutting a pale beam ahead of her. Saya moved 2 rows over, tail low and controlled. Torvek's mineral-veined arms brushed cases as he passed them with careful precision. The archive of First Contact was at the back, a separate section with a distinct wall, pale gold panels matching the admission chamber, the insignia of the very first Accord species arranged in a ring around a central case. The central case held a single document, pressed flat under a preservation panel, old enough that the material it was written on was not paper, and not any synthetic fiber Nora recognized. She leaned close. The document was in Old Selen on the left side, and in another language on the right, but this language she had seen before. She turned the gray-wrapped book over and opened it to the first page. Same script. Exact same script, character for character, as the inscription on the right half of the central case document. She straightened up. She held the book beside the case. The light from her datapad fell across both. Saya appeared at her shoulder, amber eyes moving between the book and the case. Her tail was very still. "That language on the right side," she said quietly. "That's not in the archive's language registry." She looked at Nora. "It's not classified. It's not in there. It was never categorized." Nora looked at the inscription on the case. "Can you read the Old Selen side?" Saya looked at the document. She was quiet for a moment. The amber preservation light from the case glowed between them, warm and old. First contact occurred on a small, dense world, with high surface gravity and thin atmosphere. The species demonstrated no energy projection ability, no psionic capacity, no biological augmentation. They were assessed as low priority. The assessment team left. Saya stopped. She read the next line. Her tail dropped completely. 14 years later, they followed us home. Nora looked at the document. She looked at the right side, the script that matched her book exactly. She thought about threat assessment class. She thought about the maintenance port. She thought about the ionized plant stem. She thought about the xenobiological registry, arguing for 2 years about whether she was a strategic intelligence or a curious generalist. She thought about the fact that both of those categories might be simultaneously correct. Behind them, the archive lights shifted. The door at the far end of the room opened. Draz's flat, heavy footsteps came down the main row, his 2 broad arms at his sides, his amber eyes cutting through the dim archive light like small, cold suns. He stopped at the end of the first contact row. He looked at Nora. He looked at the open book in her hand. He looked at the central case. His expression, which had never smiled, shifted into something that was not quite calculation and not quite recognition, but occupied the space between the two. "You found it," he said. Saya's claws extended fully. Torvek's broad hands settled flat against the case beside him, steady as stone. Nora held up the book. "You put this in my locker," she said. It was not a question. Draz was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "The Chancellor put it in your locker." He looked at the central case. The script on the right side of that document was written by the species that made first contact with the Solene 800 years ago, before the Accord existed, before the Registry existed. He looked back at Nora. The Registry couldn't classify them then either. His wide amber eyes were very steady. They left without identifying themselves. We never found them again. He paused. Until 6 months ago, when the Xenobiological Registry received your enrollment application and a genetic profile that matched the biological trace samples from that first contact record exactly. The amber preservation light hummed in the silence. Saya's tail was not moving at all. Torvek's dark green eyes had not blinked. Nora looked at the document for a long moment. She looked at the 2 sides, the old Solene and the unregistered language, and she looked at Draz, and then she tilted her dark curly head slightly to one side, in the way she had tilted it at the small fire on her bag that morning. "So the reason the Registry can't classify me," she said slowly, "is that the last time they tried to classify my species left and then came back 800 years later to enroll in their academy." Draz stared at her. "That," he said, with the weight of someone who had rehearsed this moment and found the reality significantly more disorienting than rehearsal, "is an accurate summary. Yes." Nora looked at the central case. She looked at the book. She put the book back in her scorched bag. "Cool," she said. "What time is dinner?" On the observation deck, high above, Chancellor Elidra stood at the glass railing, her silver reflective eyes on the pale green terminal where the archive's motion sensors had flagged 3 unauthorized presences 6 minutes ago. She had not called Draz off. She had not sent additional security. She had stood here and let it happen, because some things needed to happen in order to be believed, and some species could only be understood by watching them move through a problem the way water moves through stone, not forcing it, not stopping, just continuing until the stone was different. The terminal screen showed the archive feed, 3 small figures standing in the amber glow of the first contact case. 1 gray jacket, 1 silver-white tail, completely still, 1 pair of mineral-veined arms. Elidra watched the gray-jacketed figure put the old book into a scorched bag. She turned from the railing. She walked to the single circular terminal and opened a new document. At the top, she typed, "Xenobiological Registry. Classification File Update." Subject: Nora. Species. Designation: She stopped. She looked at the stars through the transparent dome overhead, cold and ancient and completely indifferent to categories. She typed, "See attached. Classification remains open. Recommend immediate curriculum expansion and close monitoring." Note for Academy record: the last species that left without identifying themselves came back. They enrolled. They found the archive on day 1. She stopped again. She deleted the last line and replaced it with something simpler. They always come back. She saved the document, closed the terminal, and looked out at the stars for a long moment in the quiet of the observation deck. And somewhere below in the commons, the amber table lights glowed warm, and a girl in a battered gray jacket was asking about dinner. And the galaxy, vast and old and reasonably confident it had seen